He was a duke, and he needed a wife to save his name. She was a nobody, and she needed a miracle to save her family. The bargain was struck in the cold light of day, a title for a life, a vow for a debt. But the Duke of Ashworth never read the fine print. He didn't know the quiet woman he'd bound himself to was the one person in the kingdom forbidden to live. Now the king has demanded her presence, and the man who married her to protect his title must decide if he's willing to fight the entire kingdom to keep her. The ticking of the grand clock in the study was the only sound that dared challenge the silence of Arthur Blackwood, the Duke of Ashworth. It was a heavy, judgmental sound, each tick a reminder of the deadline drawing nearer. Outside, the May afternoon was bright, but the London townhouse was as sombre as its master. Arthur stood by the window, his back to the room, a tall, imposing figure framed against the light. He was a man built on logic, on control. At 29, he commanded one of the oldest and wealthiest duchies in England. He managed mines, shipping lines, and vast estates in Northumberland. He did not, however, suffer fools, and he certainly did not believe in an archaic, foolish clause in his own family's charter. "It is, I am afraid, quite real, Your Grace." Mr. Pembroke, his solicitor, spoke from the chair where he'd been seated for an hour. Pembroke was a man of ledgers and laws, and his face was pale with the gravity of his findings. The Ashworth Charter, penned in 1488, contains a succession proviso. It states that should the reigning duke fail to produce a legitimate heir, or be wed in anticipation of one, by his 30th birthday, a claim of unsuitability can be lodged. "A claim," Arthur said, his voice a low rumble. "By whom? My line is direct. There is no one." "There is, Your Grace." Pembroke sighed, adjusting his spectacles. He rustled a parchment. "Lord Rupert Valerius." Arthur turned. The name left a bitter taste. Valerius was a distant cousin, a fop at court known for his silks, his debts, and his whispering intimacy with King James III. Valerius is a leech. His blood is thin. But it is Blackwood blood, Your Grace, and he has petitioned the king. He claims your focus on your northern industries, your refusal to attend court, and your unmarried state prove you unsuitable to manage a duchy of such strategic importance. The king, it seems, is inclined to agree. The trap was suddenly clear. The king resented Arthur's independence. He hated that Ashworth's wealth flowed from northern coal and not from royal favour. Valerius was the king's tool to bring him to heel. "And my 30th birthday," Arthur stated, "is in 3 weeks." "Precisely. If you are unmarried on that day, the king will convene the Privy Council to hear Valerius's claim. They will strip you of your title, your lands, and your fortune, and grant it all to him." Arthur's hands clenched. Everything he had built, everything his father and grandfather had consolidated, was to be stolen by a court parasite because of a 400-year-old piece of paper. "Then the solution is simple. I must marry." Pembroke looked relieved. "Yes, Your Grace. We have limited time. I have taken the liberty of reviewing potential candidates. The daughters of the Earl of C. "No," Arthur cut him off. "A society wedding will take months to arrange. Banners, settlements, feasts. I do not have months. I have days. I need a wife who will not ask questions. One who is manageable, quiet, and above all, available." Pembroke hesitated. "Your Grace, a marriage of this nature, to secure the line, it requires a certain pedigree." "It requires a signature," Arthur corrected him. "Find me a woman who needs something I can provide, something more pressing than social standing. Find me someone desperate." The solicitor, a man who typically dealt in land swaps, looked profoundly uncomfortable. "Your Grace, That is irregular. My situation is irregular. See it done, Pembroke. It took Pembroke 2 days. 2 days during which Arthur felt the walls of his world closing in. When the solicitor returned, he did not bring a list of debutantes. He brought a single, thin file. Seraphina Croft, Pembroke began, his voice low. 22 years old, daughter of the late Dr. Alistair Croft, a former academic. They reside in a small rented house in Bloomsbury. And? Arthur prompted, impatient. Dr. Croft, it seems, was not only an academic. He was a debtor, a significant one. His primary creditor, who held the note on his entire estate, was your late father. Arthur frowned, recalling the name. The man who wrote that nonsense about alternative royal lines? That Croft? The same. Upon his death 3 months ago, his debts passed to his daughter. The total outstanding is staggering. She has been selling off his library piece by piece to keep a roof over her head. But the note is due. She and her invalid mother will be sent to debtor's prison by the end of B. She is a gentlewoman, by birth, if not by means. She works part-time, mending books for a small printer. She is, by all accounts, educated, intelligent, and utterly without prospects. She is, Your Grace, desperate. Perfect, Arthur said. The word sounded like iron. Arrange the meeting, tonight. The house in Bloomsbury was small, but clean. The smell of old paper and furniture polish clung to the air. Seraphina Croft was not what he had expected. He had anticipated a weeping, cowed creature. The woman who met him in the parlour was pale and thin, yes, but her grey eyes were clear and unnervingly direct. She wore a simple grey dress, her brown hair pinned back without ornament. He did not sit. He did not waste time with pleasantries. Miss Croft, I am the Duke of Ashworth. I hold the note on your father's debt. She flinched, but her chin stayed up. Your Grace, I had assumed you would send an agent. I am here on a matter of business. You owe my estate a sum you cannot possibly pay. In 1 week, you and your mother will be incarcerated. Your home and its contents will be seized. He watched her hands twist in her lap. She knew it was true. I have a proposition for you, Arthur continued, his voice flat. It is a transaction. I require a wife. Immediately. You require solvency. Seraphina's head snapped up. Her eyes, which he'd thought were merely grey, held sparks of blue and green. A wife? A duchess, to be precise. You will marry me. In return, I will cancel your father's entire debt. I will purchase this house for your mother, and I will settle an annuity upon her that will see her comfortably cared for the rest of her life. She will want for nothing. Seraphina stared at him, her face bloodless. You want to buy me? I want to save you, Miss Croft, Arthur countered, his voice cold. I am offering you a choice, one you do not currently have. You can take my name and live in comfort as the Duchess of Ashworth, or you can retain your name and watch your mother die in the Fleet prison. The terms are simple. The marriage will be in name only. You will be my wife on paper. You will live in my home. You will be civil. You will not ask questions. In return, your family is secure. That is the bargain. She was silent for a full minute, her gaze fixed on a crack in the floorboards. He could see the struggle, the pride warring with the terrifying, practical reality. Why? She finally whispered. Why me? A debtor's daughter? A woman with no name, no connections? Because you have no connections, Arthur said, the truth of it sharp. Because you are unknown, and because you have no other choice. She looked up at him then, and for a fleeting second he felt an unfamiliar pang of something. It was not pity. It was respect. She did not cry. She did not plead. She assessed him. "If I do this," she said, her voice shaking only slightly, "my mother, she must never know the reason. She must believe it is a match of affection. She will believe whatever you tell her. I will be the model of generosity. The details are my concern. And your life? My life? As your wife? You will have your own wing at Blackwood Manor. You will have access to the finest library in the north. You will want for nothing, Miss Croft, except perhaps my company. I do not imagine we will see much of one another." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "Then, Your Grace, it appears you have bought yourself a duchess." Arthur nodded, a single, sharp motion. "Mr. Pembroke will be here in the morning with the special license. We will be married by midday. Pack a bag. You will be leaving for Northumberland tomorrow." He turned and left the small, suffocating parlour without another word, the tick of his own deadline echoing in his mind. The bargain was struck. The title was safe. The wedding took place in the damp, empty nave of St. Swithin's Church, a forgotten stone building near Pembroke's offices. The only witnesses were Pembroke himself and a bewildered, elderly verger. Seraphina wore her one good dress, the same grey wool she had worn the night before. Arthur wore a dark riding coat, his expression as unyielding as the stone pillars around them. The vicar, hastily summoned and heavily paid, read the rites with a speed that suggested he too understood this was a transaction. When Arthur spoke his vows, his voice was clear and strong, a declaration of ownership. When Seraphina whispered hers, the words were barely audible, lost in the cavernous silence. Arthur slid a simple, heavy gold band onto her finger. It was cold, like his hands. He did not kiss her. He simply nodded at the vicar, signed the register, and motioned for her to follow. "You are now the Duchess of Ashworth," he stated in the carriage, as if informing her of a change in the weather. "Your duties are, for the moment, non-existent. My staff in London will see your mother settled. We leave for the north at once." Seraphina looked down at the ring on her finger. It felt like a manacle. "As you wish, Your Grace." The journey to Northumberland took 4 days. They travelled in the Duke's personal carriage, a large, well-sprung vehicle that was as opulent as it was cold. They barely spoke. Arthur spent his time poring over ledgers and maps, his brow furrowed in concentration. Seraphina spent her time staring out the window, watching England dissolve from the crowded, desperate familiarity of London to the vast, wild emptiness of the north. Blackwood Manor was not a manor. It was a fortress. It rose from the moors like a fist of dark grey stone, intimidating and magnificent. The staff, hundreds of them, were lined up in the great hall, clearly assembled on short notice. Their faces, uniformly stoic, held a flicker of profound shock. The housekeeper, a formidable woman named Mrs. Greaves, stepped forward. "Your Grace, we were not expecting you." "Evidently," Arthur said, stripping off his gloves. "This is the Duchess of Ashworth, my wife. See that her things are taken to the Devereux wing." A collective gasp, swiftly stifled, went through the staff. The Devereux wing. It had been shuttered for 50 years. "Your Grace, yes, of course," Mrs. Greaves stammered, recovering. She curtsied deeply to Seraphina. "Your Grace, welcome to Blackwood Manor." Seraphina, exhausted and overwhelmed, merely inclined her head. She was led away up a winding staircase to a part of the house that was clearly separate from the main living quarters. The wing was beautiful, elegantly furnished, but with a thick layer of dust and a distinct chill. "The Duke, he has not used this wing. It was his mother's, and her mother's before," Mrs. Greaves explained, her tone carefully neutral. "It will be properly staffed and warmed by nightfall. Thank you, Mrs. Greaves. It is lovely." Serafina said. Her life settled into a strange, lonely routine. She was a ghost in a palace. She ate her meals alone in her private sitting room. Arthur was, as he had promised, absent. He was gone before dawn, riding his estates or meeting with his mine foreman, and returned long after she had retired. She was a duchess. She had silk sheets, a personal maid, and all the food she could eat. She had never been more miserable. The only solace she found was the one he had promised, the library. It was not one room, but 5, a labyrinth of shelves that stretched up 3 stories. And it was a disaster. Books were piled in corners, manuscripts were unrolled on tables, and the cataloguing system was non-existent. It was the library of a man who used books, not one who collected them. On the 3rd day, Serafina, unable to bear the silence of her wing any longer, put on a simple morning dress, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. Her father had taught her the book trade. She knew how to mend a spine, how to read a catalogue mark, and how to organize chaos. She was on a rolling ladder, halfway up a shelf of 17th-century poetry, when Arthur found her. He had entered the library so silently, she didn't know he was there until he spoke. "What are you doing?" Serafina yelped, nearly dropping a heavy volume of Donne. She clung to the ladder, dust smudging her cheek. "Your Grace, I apologize. I was just a mess." Arthur stood at the base of the ladder, staring up at her. He was in his shirt sleeves, his hair damp with sweat from a ride. He looked less like a duke and more like a man. "You are organizing my library." "I was a librarian's assistant, Your Grace," she said, her voice defensive. "I couldn't help it. This first edition of Paradise Lost was being crushed by a stack of shipping manifests. It was criminal." He looked around. In just a few hours, she had cleared 3 tables and begun sorting the books by era and subject. She had even started a new, logical catalogue in a spare ledger. A strange expression crossed his face. It wasn't anger. It might have been impressed. "You know how to read these?" he asked, tapping a Latin text. "And Greek," she replied, descending the ladder. "My father insisted. He said it was a greater inheritance than money. He proved himself correct on both counts." Arthur picked up the new catalogue she had started. Her handwriting was clear and precise. "You have," he said, "a practical mind, Your Grace." It was the first time he had called her that, without it sounding like a legal designation. "I have a need to be useful, Your Grace," she said softly. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time since the parlour in Bloomsbury. He saw the intelligence in her eyes, the smudge of dust on her face, and the strength in her small frame. "Carry on," he said gruffly, turning away. "See Mrs. Greaves if you require more supplies, and do not damage the Don." He left. Serafina let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. It was the first real conversation they'd had. It was a start. The fragile peace was shattered 2 days later. Serafina was in the library again when the butler, Hollings, entered, his face pale. "Your Grace, a visitor has arrived. He is in the grand salon with the Duke." "A visitor?" Serafina said, confused. Arthur had made it clear he was not receiving anyone. "It is Lord Rupert Valerius, Your Grace." The name hit her like a physical blow, the man her husband had married her to thwart. "He asked specifically," Hollings continued, his voice tight, "to be introduced to the new Duchess." Fear, cold and sharp, pierced her. This was the man who wanted to destroy her husband. And she was the weapon her husband had used against him. "Very well, Hollings," she said, forcing her hands to be still. "Please show me the way." She walked into the grand salon, a room of imposing portraits and gilded furniture. Arthur was standing by the fireplace, his posture rigid. The other man, Lord Valerius, was all smiles and lavender silk. He was handsome in a soft, predatory way. He turned as she entered, and his eyes swept over her, a slow, insolent appraisal that made her skin crawl. "Ah," Valerius purred, bowing with exaggerated flair, "and this must be the blushing bride, the miracle that saved the Ashworth line from review." "Valerius," Arthur said, his voice a low warning, "this is my wife, Seraphina, Duchess of Ashworth. Seraphina, this is Lord Valerius." "A pleasure, Your Grace," Seraphina murmured, curtsying. "Oh, the pleasure is all mine, Duchess," Valerius said, taking her hand. He held it a moment too long. "Ashworth, you are a man of infinite surprises. To pluck such a rare flower from complete obscurity. Tell me, Duchess, where did my cousin find you? He's been so very secretive." "That is a matter between my husband and myself, Lord Valerius," Seraphina said, her voice quiet but firm. Valerius laughed, a high, unpleasant sound. "Spoken like a true duchess. But you must be careful, Your Grace. Our dear Arthur is known for his transactions. One must always be sure of the value of one's assets." He was looking at her, but the threat was clearly aimed at Arthur. "Your visit is concluded, Rupert," Arthur said, stepping forward, his presence forcing Valerius to release Seraphina's hand. "So it is," Valerius said, his smile never wavering. He bowed again to Seraphina. "We shall be seeing much more of each other, I am sure. The king will be most fascinated to meet the woman who has so captured our cold duke's heart." He walked out, leaving a trail of lavender scent and palpable malice. Seraphina was shaking. "He's a terrible man." "He is a snake," Arthur said, his eyes dark, staring at the door Valerius had exited. "And he is not finished." He turned to her, his face a mask of controlled fury. "He looked at you. He spoke to you. He knows my deadline has passed. He is looking for a new weakness. He is looking for a new way to break me." "And am I that?" she asked, her voice small. "A weakness?" Arthur looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You are my wife," he said, as if that explained everything. "Do not leave the grounds. Do not speak to anyone. He will be back." The encounter with Lord Valerius left a stain on the house. The fragile truce Seraphina had begun to build in her own mind, the quiet routine of her life, was shattered. Arthur retreated even further into himself. He was now openly hostile, not to her, but to the world. He doubled the guards at the gates and rode the perimeter of his lands like a man expecting an invasion. Seraphina was, once again, alone. But this time her solitude in the Devereux wing felt less like a retreat and more like a prison. The name of the wing itself, which she hadn't paid much attention to before, now seemed odd. Why had the staff gasped? She returned to the library, her only sanctuary. But now her work had a new purpose. She was not just organizing. She was searching. She wanted to understand this house, this family, that she was now inextricably tied to. She wanted to understand the man who had married her. She worked her way to the back of the third room, a section that was more of a storage space than a library. It was filled with trunks of old letters, discarded household ledgers, and portraits draped in dusty canvas. It was the Blackwood family's attic. In a dark corner, wedged behind a stack of damaged books, was a small, leather-bound journal. It was not a grand ledger. It was a personal diary. The cover was embossed with a faded crest she didn't recognize, a stylized tree with a descending dove. She opened it. The handwriting was feminine, elegant, and filled with passion. The Duke of Ashworth, my father-in-law, is a tyrant, the first entry read. He sees my blood as a stain, a risk. He does not understand that my blood is my strength. Seraphina sat on the floor, dust settling on her dress, and read. The journal was dated 1788, 50 years prior. It belonged to Arthur's grandmother, a woman named Seraphina. She felt a jolt. Arthur's grandmother was named Seraphina, the woman the Devereux wing was named for. She read on. This first Seraphina wrote of her loneliness, her isolation in the north, her cold, dutiful husband, Arthur's grandfather. But she also wrote of her family. He insisted I renounce my name. He fears it. He fears the king. But I will not. I am a Devereux. My name is Seraphina Devereux, and I will not let my children forget it. Devereux. The name echoed in her mind. The Devereux wing. She continued reading, her heart pounding. The journal spoke of a family, the House of Devereux, that had been powerful rivals to the current royal line centuries ago. They had been accused of treason, their land seized, their titles stripped. The family was attainted, declared traitor's blood by the crown, and systematically erased from history. Arthur's grandmother had been the last known descendant, a woman whose tainted blood had been overlooked when she married the Duke, bringing a massive, forgotten dowry of land with her. My father's research, Seraphina whispered to the empty room. Her father, Dr. Alistair Croft, had been an academic, a disgraced academic. His obsession? Alternative royal lines. The nonsense Arthur had called it. He wasn't writing nonsense. He was writing history, her history. She raced back to her wing, her mind reeling. In her father's trunk, the one thing she had managed to save from the creditors was a small, locked box. She still had the key. Inside, beneath her mother's modest jewelry, was a folded piece of vellum. It was a family tree. Her father's frantic academic script traced a line. Alistair Croft, married to Elspeth March, son of Thomas Croft, who was the son of a woman named Matilda, and that Matilda was the daughter of William Devereux. William Devereux was the brother of Seraphina Devereux, the Duchess of Ashworth who had written the journal. Croft, Seraphina said, the name feeling alien in her mouth. It was a new name, a name to hide behind. Her father hadn't just been in debt, he had been in hiding. He had spent his life and his fortune researching the very thing that could get them all killed, the truth of their own bloodline. She was a Devereux. She sank onto the floor, the vellum in her hand. This was her secret, the secret that had cost her father his reputation and his life. She thought of Valerius. Where did my cousin find you? She thought of Arthur's words. Because you have no connections. A horrifying thought began to form. What if he was wrong? What if her connection was the only reason she was here? She had to know. She had to confront Arthur. She found him in his study, the same room where the clock had ticked down his deadline. He was working, a map of his mining operations spread before him. Your Grace, she said from the doorway. He looked up, his expression annoyed at the interruption. I am busy. I have a question, and I will not be dismissed. She had never used such a tone with him. He frowned, leaning back in his chair. What is it? My father, she said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. Dr. Alistair Croft. You knew of his work. I knew it was academic folly. It cost him his fortune. It cost him his name, Seraphina said, stepping into the room. His real name. Our real name. She walked to the desk and laid the vellum family tree down on top of his mining map. My father's name was not Croft. It was Devereux. He changed it to protect us." Arthur stared at the parchment. He traced the line with his finger, his face slowly losing its color. He followed it down to her name, Seraphina Croft. He looked up at her, his eyes dark with a dawning, terrible understanding. "Your name?" "It is Seraphina Devereux," she said, "the same as your grandmother. I am, it seems, the last direct descendant of the traitor's line. The line the king has sworn to extinguish." Arthur stood up from his desk so quickly the chair crashed backward. He didn't look at her. He looked at the wall, at the portrait of his grandfather. "The debt," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Your father's debt. It was real. Pembroke, he found it." "Did he?" Seraphina challenged, her fear replaced by a sudden, cold anger. "Or was he led to it? Was I found by accident, Arthur? Or was I chosen?" The silence in the room was absolute. The ticking clock was deafening. "Valerius," Arthur said, the name a curse. "When he was here, he looked at you. Not as a woman, as a thing, an asset." He strode to the bell pull and yanked it, a violence in the motion that terrified her. Hollings appeared in the doorway almost instantly. "Your Grace?" "Get Mr. Pembroke," Arthur commanded. "I don't care if he's in London. I don't care if he's sleeping. Get him on a horse and get him here. Now." He turned back to Seraphina. The cold, logical Duke was gone. In his place was a man who looked like he'd just seen a ghost. "I married you," he said, his voice raw, "to protect my title." "Yes," she said, wrapping her arms around herself. "And I have," he said, realization dawning in his eyes, "just handed the king the one thing he needs to destroy me completely." He wasn't looking at his lands or his title. He was looking at her. "He won't just take the title, will he? If he knows who you are." "The penalty for treason, Your Grace," Seraphina whispered, "is death, and for traitor's blood, the penalty is erasure." "He will not have you," Arthur stated. It was not a promise of comfort. It was a declaration of war. "I will not let him." Mr. Pembroke arrived 3 days later, his face grey with exhaustion and fear. He was ushered into the Duke's study, where Arthur and Seraphina waited. The tension in the room was so thick it was hard to breathe. "Your Grace," Pembroke stammered, bowing. "You summoned me. I do not understand." "You will?" Arthur said, his voice flat and dangerous. He pointed to the vellum chart still spread on his desk. "Tell me, Pembroke, how exactly did you find Miss Croft?" The solicitor's eyes widened. "Your Grace, as I explained, the debt. It was in your father's ledgers, a significant, unsecured debt. It was the perfect leverage, just as you asked. Someone desperate." "Show me," Arthur commanded. "Show me the ledger." Pembroke, shaking, was escorted to the archives by Hollings. He returned half an hour later with a heavy, dust-covered book. He opened it. "See, Your Grace. A. Croft. The debt is clear." Arthur scanned the page. "And who, Pembroke?" he asked, his voice lethally soft. "First drew your attention to this particular entry, among thousands?" Pembroke's face went white. "I receive information from many sources at court. A clerk, a rumor." "A rumor," Arthur pressed. "From whom?" "It may have been mentioned in passing," Pembroke whispered, his eyes darting to the floor. "By a secretary, a man in Lord Valerius's employ." Seraphina closed her eyes. It was true. Arthur slammed his hand on the desk, making the solicitor jump. "So, you didn't find her. She was given to you. She was a piece of bait, and you, my most trusted agent, led me right into the trap." "Your Grace, I swear I did not know." Pembroke was frantic, on the verge of tears. "I thought I was saving you. I did not know who she was." "Neither did I," Arthur said, his voice hollow. He looked at Seraphina. "It was the perfect trap. Valerius knew. He knew who she was. He knew her father was in debt. He steered you to her, Pembroke. He let me marry her. But why? Pembroke asked, his mind clearly unable to grasp the scope of the conspiracy. Because, Serafina said, finding her voice. Marrying me was not a solution to the Duke's problem. It was the problem. Arthur nodded, his eyes fixed on her. If I had married a standard debutante, Valerius would have lost his claim. But by marrying her I have, in the eyes of the king, allied myself with a traitor's bloodline. I have sheltered the last Devereux. Valerius will not accuse me of being an unsuitable duke. He will accuse me of being a traitor. He will, Pembroke breathed, collapsing into a chair. The king will have you attainted. Your lands, your title, all of it will be forfeit to the crown. And the crown, Arthur finished, will grant it all to the loyal and vigilant Lord Valorius for exposing the plot. It was brilliant, it was diabolical, and it was airtight. Valerius had not just set a trap, he had built a cage, and Arthur had walked into it, dragging Serafina with him. "What do we do, Your Grace?" Pembroke asked, his face a mask of despair. "We could seek an annulment, claim she deceived you." Arthur looked at Serafina. He could see the flash of fear in her eyes. An annulment would save him, but it would doom her. It would be an admission of her identity, and she would be cast out, a declared traitor, with nowhere to run. The king's men would have her before she reached the county line. He, the Duke of Ashworth, had a choice. He could cut her loose, sacrifice her, and perhaps, salvage his own title from the wreckage. He could claim ignorance, beg the king's pardon, and throw Serafina to the wolves. It was the logical move, the one his father would have made. Serafina watched him. She saw the calculation in his eyes. She saw the moment the cold, pragmatic Duke wrestled with the man he was becoming. She saw him weigh his life's work, his lands, his mines, his legacy, against her, a woman he barely knew, a woman he had bought. She braced herself for the verdict. When Arthur finally spoke, his voice was not the voice of the Duke who had bartered for her in Bloomsbury. It was quiet, resolved, and held an iron she had never heard before. "No," he said. Pembroke looked up. "No, Your Grace. There will be no annulment. She is the Duchess of Ashworth. She is my wife. The marriage is valid." He turned to Serafina, and his eyes held hers. "And you, madam, were not deceptive. You were Serafina Croft. You knew yourself as nothing else. Is that not correct?" "Yes," she whispered, her heart hammering. "My father. He never told me the full truth. Only that we had to be careful." "Then you are innocent of any deception," Arthur declared, turning back to Pembroke. "I married Serafina Croft. I did not marry a Devereux, because no such person existed in my knowledge. I will not be held accountable for a history I did not know, and I will not surrender my wife." "But Your Grace," Pembroke pleaded, "Valerius will make the accusation. The king will believe him. You cannot fight the crown." "Then the crown will have to fight me," Arthur said. The air crackled with the finality of his decision. "You are to return to London, Pembroke. You will not, however, return to your offices. You will go to my townhouse. You will become a shadow. You will listen. You will find out what Valerius's next move is. You will find out when he plans to strike. I have been defending. Now, I will attack." "And us, Your Grace?" Serafina asked, her voice small. "What do we do?" Arthur looked at her, his expression softening for a fraction of a second. "We, Your Grace, will prepare for a visitor. Valerius will not play his hand through letters. He will want the king to see the evidence for himself. a royal summons will come, and when it does, we will be ready. Ready? Ready to do what? To go to London, Arthur said, a grim smile touching his lips. Valerius thinks he is springing a trap in a courtroom. He is mistaken. I will not be tried in secret. If the king wants a spectacle, he will have one. He was a different man. The weight of his title, which he had fought to protect, had been lifted, replaced by the weight of her life, and it had changed him. The cold, logical duke had found a new and far more dangerous purpose. Pembroke, Arthur said, his voice sharp. You will also do one more thing. You will use my private accounts, the ones in Edinburgh, not London. You will find Dr. Croft's research, all of it. Buy it, steal it, I don't care. I want every book, every letter, every scrap of paper he ever wrote. If my wife is a Devereux, then I will learn exactly what that means. Pembroke, seeing the shift in his master, nodded, a new fire in his own eyes. Yes, Your Grace. It will be done. After the solicitor had gone, a heavy silence settled between them. You should have taken the annulment, Seraphina said quietly, not looking at him. You could have saved yourself. And what of you? He asked, walking to the window, staring out at the wild moors of his home. I am used to saving myself, Your Grace. I would have found a way. You would have been arrested and executed, he said, his voice flat. That is not a way. It is an end. I will not have your death on my conscience, madam. So this is about your conscience, not about me. He turned to face her. The room was dark, but a sliver of moonlight caught his face. I made a bargain with you, Seraphina. I promised you a life of comfort and safety in exchange for your name. It seems I am failing to provide either. I will not break my vow. Not on this. It was a cold vow, Your Grace. Then let it be a cold comfort, he retorted. But it is a vow nonetheless. Valerius thinks he knows me. He thinks I am a man of ledgers and profits. He is about to find out what a Blackwood does when someone threatens his family. And you, he said, his gaze pinning her, are his family. The waiting was a special kind of torture. For 2 weeks, Blackwood Manor was a fortress of silent anticipation. Arthur drilled his household guard, a small private militia he kept for policing his lands. He met with his mine managers and estate stewards, shoring up loyalties, moving gold from his London banks to the vaults beneath his home. He was preparing for a siege. Seraphina, meanwhile, felt a different kind of pressure. She was no longer just a bargain. She was the casus belli, the cause for war. She and Arthur were now partners in this strange, dangerous dance. They ate their meals together, not in silence, but in strategic discussion. He asked her about her father, about his research, about any detail she could remember. He always said the Devereux treason was a lie, Seraphina recalled one evening, staring into the fire. He said it was a fabrication, that the Devereux lands were too rich, their influence too great. The king at the time, he needed them to be traitors. A lie, Arthur mused. A lie can be disproven, but it needs evidence. My father spent his life searching for it, she said sadly. It's what bankrupted him. A new dynamic was forming between them. The coldness was gone, replaced by a shared, crackling energy. He would find her in the library, and instead of her organizing, he would be reading, poring over the Devereux Journal, asking her to translate a Latin phrase. He began to see her, not as a symbol, not as a wife, but as Seraphina. He saw her intelligence, her quiet resilience, her loyalty. She, in turn, saw the man behind the title. She saw his fierce, protective nature, his sharp mind, and the deep, buried sense of justice he possessed. He was, she realized, a good man trapped by a terrible duty. And she, by accident, was now his duty. The summons arrived on a cold, rainy morning, delivered by a troop of the king's own cavalry. The messenger, arrogant in his red coat, presented the scroll to Arthur in the great hall. It was not a request. It was a command. His Majesty, King James III, summons Arthur Blackwood, Duke of Ashworth, and his new-made Duchess to court. You are to present yourselves at St. James's Palace in 1 week's time to celebrate your nuptials. Celebrate, Arthur scoffed, the scroll crushing in his fist. It is a trap, Seraphina whispered, standing beside him. Of course it is, Arthur said. He will not accuse me in the north. I am too strong here. He wants me in his city, in his palace. He wants to isolate me. He looked at the captain of the guard. Inform His Majesty, we will be delighted. The journey to London was the opposite of their first trip. Arthur did not travel in a single carriage. He assembled a train of 20 household guards, all armed, flying the Ashworth banner. He moved not like a man going to a party, but like a man moving an army. They spoke little of the danger. Instead, he coached her. You are not Seraphina Croft, he instructed her, as the carriage rattled over the roads. You are not a debtor's daughter. You are the Duchess of Ashworth. You are my wife. You will not bow your head. You will not stammer. When you walk into that throne room, you will be the most important woman there. They will be looking for weakness. Show them nothing but steel. I am frightened, Arthur, she admitted, the first time she had used his name. He didn't flinch. He simply reached across the carriage and took her hand. His was warm, calloused, and strong. It was the first time they had touched willingly. So am I, he admitted, a confession that shocked her more than any threat. But not for myself. Valerius has miscalculated. He thinks to trap a duke, but he has forgotten that for centuries my ancestors were warlords first. He wants to play at politics. He is not prepared for this. He let go of her hand, but the warmth remained. When they arrived in London, the city was tense. Word had spread of the Duke's army. They were not quartered at their small townhouse. Instead, Arthur had rented a massive, fortified mansion near the palace, a statement of power in itself. The night before the court appearance, Mr. Pembroke slipped into the house through a servant's entrance. He was thin, wired, and looked as if he hadn't slept in a week. Your Grace, he said, handing Arthur a thick satchel. It is all I could find. It cost a fortune. Croft's notes, diaries, even correspondence with other academics. Arthur tore it open, spreading the papers on the table. And Valerius? Arthur asked. He has the king's ear. Completely, Pembroke reported. The trap is set. Tomorrow, in the middle of the celebration, Valerius will publicly ask for the Duchess to be recognized. He will then present evidence of her true identity. A pre-written warrant for her arrest for treason, and yours for harboring her, is already drawn up. It will be a public, humiliating destruction. Arthur and Seraphina scanned the papers her father had left. Most were dead ends, theories. But then, Seraphina's hand darted out. This one, she said, her voice trembling. I recognized the seal. It was a letter, not from her father, but to him. It was from a colleague, a historian in Spain, dated 10 years ago. Alistair, it read, you are mad. You cannot pursue this. But what you seek, it is not in England. When the Devereux lands were seized, the family archives were not burned. They were taken. I have found a reference in the private collection of the Duke of Medina Sidonia, the traitor's original confession. It seems to have been a gift between the English and Spanish crowns. A confession, Arthur said, his eyes gleaming. Why would a rival king keep a confession of an English traitor? Unless, Seraphina breathed, it wasn't a confession, unless it was proof of the lie. Something to be held over the English king's head. Blackmail. Exactly. But it's in Spain. It does us no good. Arthur's hope faded. No, Seraphina said, her mind racing, connecting dots her father had laid. The Duke of Medina Sidonia. His ancestor led the Armada, and his ancestor, according to this note, his ancestor was Lord Valerius's ancestor, the first Lord Valerius, the one who made the original accusation of treason against the Devereux. Arthur went perfectly still. Valerius's family gave the proof to the Spanish? No, Seraphina said. They didn't give it. They sold it. They sold the proof that their own accusation was a lie to a foreign enemy for profit. That, she said, her finger jabbing the paper, is treason. Real treason. Not some ancient bloodline. A direct, provable act of selling state secrets to the enemy. It is a claim, Arthur said, his mind now racing with hers. We have no proof. The letter is in Spain. But Valerius doesn't know that, Seraphina said, a fire in her eyes that matched his. All he knows is his family's long, dirty secret. Arthur stared at her, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. It was the first time she had ever seen him smile. Seraphina, Duchess of Ashworth, he said, you are without a doubt the most brilliant woman in England. And tomorrow, he said, taking her hand, you will be the most terrifying. The throne room at St. James's Palace was a gilded trap filled with hundreds of courtiers. When Arthur and Seraphina entered, a hush fell. He in severe black, and she in Ashworth grey with brilliant diamonds, were a vision of stark northern power. At the throne, Lord Valerius sprung his trap. Your Majesty, he cried, this is an exposure. I have proof this woman is not Seraphina Croft. She is Seraphina Devereux, a traitor's spawn, and I have proof Ashworth knew it and married her to press her false claim to your throne. He held up a warrant for their arrest. The king turned to Arthur. Well, Ashworth, what say you to treason? Arthur's voice was calm. He is a fool. Of course she is a Devereux. I have known it since I met her. She is the granddaughter of Seraphina Devereux, the last Duchess of Ashworth. There is no plot, only history. Valerius, stunned by this defense, stammered, The blood is attainted. It is forbidden. You speak of my family's past, my lord. Seraphina's clear voice cut through the hall. A past built on a lie, but you have been so careless with your own. She stepped forward. You accuse my ancestor of treason. But what of your ancestor, who forged that confession to steal our lands? The colour drained from Valerius's face. Is it madness to speak of the Medina Sidonia collection? Arthur's voice boomed. Is it madness to speak of the proof your family sold to Spain? Evidence of your own forgery. That is the real treason, is it not? Valerius knew the secret archive was real. He broke. This is a lie, he shrieked at the king. We had a deal. I was to have his title. In his panic, he had admitted everything. The court erupted. The king, purple with fury and humiliation, roared, Guards, arrest Lord Valerius! As Valerius was dragged away, the king fixed Arthur and Seraphina with a cold stare. The attainder on the house of Devereux shall be reversed. He was beaten. Now get out of my court. Arthur offered his arm to Seraphina. Together, to the stunned silence of the court, they turned their backs on the king and walked, victorious, out of the lion's den. They rode north, the tension of London fading. At a quiet inn, Arthur confirmed Valerius would be executed. The secret of the Spanish archive was now his leverage over the king, ensuring Serafina's name would be cleared. "You protected your title," she whispered. "No," Arthur said, his voice quiet. "I went to London ready to lose everything. I went to protect you." He confessed that the cold bargain had changed. He, a man of logic, had realized in the throne room he only cared about her safety. "I have come to care for you, Serafina." "And you, Arthur," she replied, stepping to him. He was no longer a cold duke, but a man who had seen her. He covered her hand with his. "I do not know the words," he admitted. "I do," she said. He leaned down and, for the first time, kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but a promise, a new bargain, sealed not in debt, but in devotion. They returned to Blackwood Manor as true partners. The Devereux wing was opened, their lives joined. As the king quietly pardoned her name and Valerius was executed, Arthur knew the truth. He had married to protect his title, but in fighting the kingdom to keep her, he had finally found his heart. He was a duke who thought he needed power, only to discover he needed a partner. She was a woman who thought she was worthless, only to discover she was the key to his survival. Theirs was a bargain of desperation that became a vow of devotion. But their story and the shadows of the crown are far from over. Thank you for watching this story. If you were on the edge of your seat watching Arthur and Serafina defy a king, please show your support. This is how we keep bringing you epic dramas. Hit that like button, share this video with someone else who loves historical romance, and most importantly, click subscribe and ring the bell. You won't want to miss what happens next. We read all your comments, so let us know. What was your favorite twist? See you in the next story.